Hey, I'm Cindy Fisher. I'm with the Black Belt News Network, and I'm here with Charles Sims, who is in town from Memphis here in Selma. It is Jubilee Weekend 2024, Saturday, and you just came back from the Foot Soldiers Breakfast. What do you think about, well, let's back up.
Sure.
So you're here as a descendant of a Jim Crow author. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of reparation work and going to different communities. So tell us about your family and what made you want to do what you're doing today and why you're here in Selma.
Sure. So first, my three times great-grandfather is Senator James Z. George of Mississippi. He was a three-term United States Senator, Chief Justice of the Mississippi Supreme Court, and a Confederate general. But more importantly, he authored the 1890 Constitution of Mississippi, which laid the blueprint, and he became the primary architect of the Jim Crow laws. So obviously, John Lewis had to walk across that bridge because of laws that my great-grandfather created. So I thought it was important to come here to show support for the legacy of John Lewis and to build on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Which is about, because the Jim Crow laws that really bothered you, how do you feel we are doing with those laws now? Like, have we come a long way?
Sure. So there's been progress on legislation to improve voting rights. Obviously, my great-grandfather had the biggest obstruction to the freedom and voting rights of Black Americans. So that weighed on me and the impact of that, because it wasn't like 4 or 5 years like the American Civil War. It went almost 70 years. So it had a massive impact on our country. And what would have happened without those interruptions or interferences? Where would the Black community be? Where would Black Wall Street be? Where would the finances be? So, but more importantly than that, is important for me to show that no matter where we begin our journey, if it's in Oxford, Mississippi, or Memphis, Tennessee, or Selma, Alabama, we have the ability to sit down, reach across party and racial lines, and talk about the things that divide us. I think that's very important.
Yeah, it is important. And voting rights is a big discussion. This year's theme is not just about registering to vote, but actually showing up at the polls. And so it sounds like you've met with some pretty influential people. Have you met with folks and talked to some people here in Selma?
I have just briefly at the Foot Soldiers Breakfast. Spoke with a couple people, some of the organizers. I just got here just recently, so I'm just kind of hitting the ground and kind of getting a feel for everything. This is my first time in Selma, so I'm super excited to meet a lot of faith and community leaders and talk about the things that are going on and the grievances. But yeah, I thought it was important to kind of show that there's a lot of examples from the past of reconciliation. We look at all these examples from the 50s, 60s, 70s. We hear all these stories, but I think it's important to show modern examples because the world looks for us for leadership. And I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but what I am saying is that we have the ability to show that visual representation. And crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge is an important thing. My family was friends and colleagues with Edmund Pettus. So Edmund Pettus was at the Secession Convention in 1860, of which my great-grandfather was at that a part of that body, and Edmund Pettus was also at his funeral. So it was important for me to come here to show that, to set certain things right, to show that Edmund Pettus and my great-grandfather obviously had a big impact on racial codes and the history of the South. But it was important to show, regardless of what they did, I'm here to do what I'm going to do.
What's been the reception? How have people received your message?
It's been open. It's been openly accepted pretty widely. And obviously, there's haters everywhere. You're never going to get away from people that don't support one thing or another. But what I'm doing is going against very well-laid plans of some very powerful and important people, because division is power. Both right and left, both black and white. Both sides use it, and I would not be sitting here if I wasn't disingenuous with all politics. That's part of the reason why I'm sitting here today, because I feel like the government has failed us in many instances, and if the government could have solved this, it would have already been solved. This is up to the people to solve this issue. The government will never solve these type of issues. It's about bringing people together organically, because when you have that coming together, that's what insulates us from gathering dangers abroad and outside of our country. Because regardless of the things that happen, if we come together, we can stand in that firmly and know that we have each other. It doesn't matter who wins the next election, when the next government shutdown occurs, because we have each other. And that's what achieving unity, what I call achieving unity in the community, or what Martin Luther King III may say, the beloved community. I think that it's important. But Martin Luther King III also said at um, the last thing where they commemorated the dream speech, that there has been work on the dream, but there's still progress to be done, and everyone must play their part. And that's a small part that I have to play. That I believe when Dr. King said, "I have a dream one day that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood." So that's my part, to try to get us a little bit closer in the vicinity of that beloved community, is and doing the hard things, and having the hard conversations, and putting that best foot forward to get that ball rolling again, and get the momentum continuous, that our brighter days are ahead of us. And even in places like Selma, Alabama, or Mississippi, that we have the ability to come together and show that there is leadership in the South, and we have the ability to come together and mend those old divides, and move past that old bitterness of the past. I think that the hatred of the past has held on a long time, and I believe it's long past due that we move beyond
You
that.
have some hatred of that. You have some hanging on to.
Sure, absolutely.
The kind of, I don't know, the false nostalgia. There's some false nostalgia that the 50s were the best time ever. But if you were to go back into the 50s and you were a Black woman, would you think it was the best time to be alive ever?
Yeah, probably not. I mean,
No.
you could ask Mamie Till if that was the best time, and I
That's
guarantee
right.
you she would tell you that it was not, because
No.
her son Emmett died under the system of oppression that my great grandfather set up, and someone like Rosa Parks, like, the
Yeah.
reason why she had to sit on that bus was an impact of my great grandfather. Same with John Lewis, like I previously stated about
Are there any other
crossing over that
families that
bridge.
you have partnered with that are like yours, or like what you're doing now? Or?
I mean, it takes a very specific person to stand in the truth that I do, and I think my life's journey has prepared me for that.
Yeah, like how did you get here? What made you want to do this?
So I never thought I would do anything like this. I think that my military background, and growing up in that melting pot of the Army and in combat, my roommate in Baghdad in 2006 from Sierra Leone, West Africa. He wasn't even a citizen, but he was my best friend. He was a citizen now. He just retired, and he really rubbed off on me. He was just such a patriotic, genuine person, and I said, man, like, this dude is just so patriotic. If I was able to learn from him, like, what were the traits that I could take away from him? And he's just such an amazing person. But yeah, the Army, my life's journey, the friendships, the relationships that I fostered over time, I had no idea that would lead me towards something like this. But I worked with a lady in 2010 that she was doing some political stuff, and I reached back out to her, and she was my connection to Martin Luther King's family. So I never even knew 15 years ago I was talking to the lady that would eventually connect me with Dr. King's family.
But did you just like have a bad dream and just wake up one day like, I cannot keep going like this?
No, so it was a confluence of events. I was, like you were talking about earlier, where you talked about the 50s and that thing for nostalgia. I had my own internal kind of struggle with that, because not only did my great grandfather create the racial codes that became known as the Jim Crow laws, but one of his daughters was also the national president of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. So not only did we create the laws, we also built the statues. So my great grandfather's statue is also in Washington. The two statues from Mississippi are Jefferson Davis and my great grandfather James E. George. So obviously the nostalgia aspect, or looking back at it like that, I understand what you're saying. But the nostalgia part is one thing, but it's important to show that regardless where we come from, you still have that ability to reach across those party and racial lines.
What would your great great grandfather think about what you're doing right now?
I think he, I think he would be in support of it, and that's part of the reason why I'm here, is because I went on kind of a deep dive to understand who I thought he was, and I think that he did what he did during a different time to protect his section, and it was up to other people to protect theirs. So I think what he did in doing that was obviously to protect the white vote and to protect what he thought was important,
Property.
farmers, properties,
Yeah.
obviously. And I think that, but I did. So I know the author that wrote his biography. From the same town, and he's a professor at UT Martin. So I spoke with him, and I kind of wanted to learn certain things that made Senator George tick as a person, and that's where I thought I saw the humanity in him. And certain things that I came across would have led me to believe that he would have been in favor of this, and me speaking out. I think that he was a product of the time. He was also a soldier, so that was the part I connected with, is that his time as a soldier and how that maybe later on impacted his life, or maybe softened him over time.
He fought in the Civil War.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
He was captured twice and spent 2.5 years in a northern prison camp and was paroled after the war. But so he wasn't a great soldier. He was better, I guess.
Well, he just got caught a lot.
Yeah, he just got caught a lot. He was a lawyer. He was obviously more of a legal mind than a soldier. But yeah, he got caught a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think back to the nostalgia part, I think that people kind of try to hold on to certain things as long as they can until certain times move by them. And I think that time heals certain things. It doesn't heal everything, but it does heal certain things. And I think that's why it was up to me to step forward, opposed to someone like my mother, who I would have definitely thought that she would have been the person to assume a mantle like this. She was much more liberal, an attorney, but just a very kind-hearted person. Like, she rubbed off a lot on me and kind of raised me a certain way to look beyond race and color.
But she wasn't ready.
I don't think she was, because she was so close to that time period. She grew up in the 50s and the 60s, so being able to just straight turn dramatically the other direction.
So maybe it's the era, generation you're in.
Yeah.
Is the one that it can accept it better.
Well, like I said, I do think it was, without my specific life journey, I don't think I could be sitting here today. I think it was everything that brought me to that.
George Floyd.
So George Floyd had a big impact on it, but I also grew up on the banks of the Tallahatchie River. I grew up about 200 yards from where the courthouse, where the murders in Emmett Till were tried. So there's a lot of things that kind of led me and told me that I was on the right path. My mom's dad went to high school in Greenwood. He was in the same class with Byron D. LeBeckwith, who killed Medgar Evers. So there were so many things that kind of pointed that you're the person. Martin Luther King's bodyguard, primary bodyguard, you know what his name is? Charles Sims.
Oh.
So there was a lot of small little things that I came across that said, you need to do this. You are the person to do this. Like I said, I thought someone in my family or someone like my mother would have been much better situated, because she was a very kind person and had lived her life that way. I was the furthest person from who I thought should do something like this, but that's exactly why I thought I had to, because it's the people that you want, that don't want to do it, that need to do it. Just like kind of like politicians we should have nowadays. They all want to be there.
What's the future plan for you on this?
That's a good question. There's certain short-term and long-term things that I wanted to finish before I moved on. And to me, recharging and renewing and reinvigorating Dr. King's dream was first and foremost the most important thing to me. I think, like I said previously, Martin Luther King's son, Martin Luther King III, said that there has been progress, but everyone plays a part. So I believe that everyone does play a small part in achieving that dream. Obviously, he spoke about Alabama as well. There's people in Alabama that have a part to play towards achieving that part of it. But when he said, I have a dream, even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. Those are the reasons why I'm here, because I think it's, I believe that I've been sent an invitation through history when Dr. King reached out to me through that speech. But I believe it's more important than to just accept an invitation. You have to do the hard things to move that forward. If we value unity, we have to be willing to talk about the things that divide us. If we believe in the dream, we have to be willing to live it and pray about it. It's not just talking. You have to walk the walk. And that's the difference with some people. People like to talk a big game, but they don't like to have feet on the ground doing what needs to be done. And that's the hard part, standing in the reality. It's not, for someone like me, standing on the truth that I do, it's not the easiest thing all the time, but a lot of more people have done a lot more than I have in the journey to this, to move the needle forward. Look at what Martin Luther King and people that went through in the last 60, 70 years. They went up through, if I received a threat or one thing or another, it's not being on the streets where facing water hoses and dogs. You know what I'm saying? It's a whole different story.
Well, you're not alone. And I think you're a good example. So I'm a legacy for United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Are you really?
Yeah, my mom's mom and her sister were super active in UDC. And in fact, I didn't even know that until my great aunt died, and her funeral was at Elmwood Cemetery in Birmingham. Bear Bryant is buried there, which is important for Alabama.
Big shout out, Bear Bryant. Roll Tide.
Right, Roll Tide. but the trick too is when I showed up, there were all these women in hoop skirts, and I'm like, "What's the deal, Mom?" And it was because they were with United Daughters of the Confederacy, and that's when I started. Now I had one woman that sat with me, and she was telling me this story about looking for the grave of a general that they had not found yet, Confederate general. Well, at the time, I worked at a newspaper in Birmingham, and I did a big story about it. It's not necessarily what you would do now, right?
Sure.
But that started my journey into my family tree to find out the whole UDC thing and where was my
Sparked
Confederate
the curiosity.
Soldier. I didn't know anything about. They didn't talk about it. So if you think like my generation, I'm Gen X. We didn't really even talk about it that much. I'm not sure if the millennials even talk about it that much. Like my kids that are Gen Z, I don't tell them that much about United Daughters of Confederacy.
Sure.
But if I did, how would I present it to them so that they might get on the same journey? So that when you're asking for unity, they can say, "Ooh, yeah, I've got a history that I grew up. I was told to say that it was states' rights." The fight, the battle, the Civil War. Now that's not okay, as Nikki Haley learned. You can't dodge it anymore. You have to say that it was a fight for slavery and against slavery. But I grew up Northern aggression and states' rights.
Obviously.
So, but that was because we weren't okay with our past, and that we had relatives that were willing to fight to keep something as awful as slavery. And it's just easier to swallow, right? So if you're representing someone with a much bigger person than, I like to say that my soldier did not have slaves, was probably not fighting for his own, but for the right to continue doing it, I'm sure. I have to accept that now. I can't say states' rights anymore. So maybe you're on a journey to teach the next generation how they should accept their family history and what to do with it and how to stand up for it or against it.
That's interesting that you put it like that, because a lot of the older generation that I've talked to, I thought for me, historically, it would have been important first and foremost to try to connect with the older generation. But I still see so much pain in their eyes and in the events that they lived through. I don't know that if they're too set in certain ways to move beyond old grievances. And I think that they have the willingness to hear you out and reach out to you. But I don't know how much you're willing to.
I think it's the sons and daughters, the greats of these folks that, I'm really listening to you saying, I didn't accept that for so many years. So maybe that's something that my family, I have had folks come through Selma over the years I've been here, because they're coming here to do reparation for, like, I moved up north, but we owned slaves in Grove Hill, for instance, is one family that came through. And they settled an estate. Someone died, and they had written it in their will to give money to this specific family in Grove Hill because they were their slaves. There's descendants of slaves that they had years before. Sure. That's pretty cool to be able to narrow it to that exact one you're repairing.
Very specific.
Instead, it's more, and some reparations are happening without us being as intentional as you're being right now. Because I see it in my kids that hang out with diverse other kids without thinking a thing about it.
Sure. Yeah, for me, I think it's most important, like, obviously, when you talk about reparations, a lot of people have monetary things in their mind that come to mind immediately. And a lot of people that I've talked to, obviously, that's a big talking point. But there's other things to show.
There are other ways to do it.
Yes, there's other ways to go beyond
some is just by accepting unity and trying harder to be accepting.
I mean, you'd be amazed that some of the families and folks that I've talked to, like a week ago, I was invited to Washington to a group called the Descendants, and it was a historic group of descendants, and there was Thomas Jefferson, Ida B. Wells, Rosa Parks, descendants from Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, just an amazing group of people. Amazing. And to be able to connect with Reverend Wheeler Parker, the last remaining witness to the Emmett Till abduction, he held my hand and walked me through the Emmett Till Memorial at the Smithsonian. And I asked him, I said, did you ever think this would happen? He was like, not in a million years. Not from Mississippi, and definitely not from your background. And he grabbed my hand and took me in there, and I was just...
That must have felt really good.
I mean, yeah, for me personally, for my family, it's I mean, like I said, I grew up a few hundred yards from the Tallahatchie River. It's a very personal thing for me. And for him, like, to give him a hug and to let him know that I'm here for you. I'm here for your family, and regardless of the things that happened in the past, like, let's move forward.
So you have Dream 2020. Is that a nonprofit?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is your goal for that group?
So that's so early on, I haven't accepted money from anyone. Like, I haven't taken any donations. That will be something that we'll do in the future, because I think it's important for fundraising for certain projects. But in the beginning, I didn't want to take any money from anyone. I wanted to show that I'm standing on this and my words alone. I didn't want anyone to say that anyone bought and paid for me, told me to say something specifically. So for the last 3 years, I haven't taken a single donation, a single dime, a single penny from not a single individual, because I thought it was important to show that these were my ideas, my beliefs, and that's all I'm standing on. And so, yeah, in the future, we'll do some fundraising stuff to support certain projects that we think are important.
Oh, you'll have to keep us posted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome to Selma.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I'm Cindy Fisher, publisher of the Black Belt News Network. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube.